Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Board of Health meeting on March 6, 2023. Please note this meeting is being recorded and will be available shortly hereafter for scheduled and on-demand viewing on any smartphone or tablet device. If anyone else is recording this meeting, please notify the chairman. Pursuant to Governor Baker's July 16, 2022 signing of an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, including the extension of the March 12, 2020 and July 15, 2022 orders suspending certain provisions of the Open Meeting Law, General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 20 until March 31st, 2023. This meeting of the Chatham Board of Health is being conducted in person and via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who would like to listen to the meeting while in progress may do so by calling 1-508-945-4410, or the conference ID is 981-995-909#, or join the meeting online via Microsoft Teams through the link in the posted agenda. While this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Channel 18, despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide for real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. And now I'll turn the meeting over to our chairman, Dr. Noble Hanson.
It shall be the policy of this board to conduct its meetings under the open meetings law so as to encourage public participation whenever time permits and as part of agenda item discussions. Okay, today we have 5 items on the agenda, and we'll get a quorum first. When I call your name, if you can say present. Dick Edwards.
Present.
Ron Berman.
Here.
John Beckley.
Here.
Harold Boyce.
Here.
And Noble Hanson, I'm here. Okay, first we have a variance for 34 Scattery Road. Nicole Leavenworth and Brett Levy. Is there someone? Yep, come on up to the mic and present the variance request.
Hi, Brett Levy. Here we're looking to purchase 34 Scattery. We understand that it is a cesspool that's been deemed failed per the prior transfer to the group that's selling to us. We don't have any intention to use the home until we replace the septic system as part of a new development to the site. And so we're coming before the board to ask for its approval to grant the waiver so that we can purchase it and then come back to you later with a properly designed system as part of a newly sited home.
Okay, so you plan to take down the current building, and then you're building an entirely new
Yes.
home with the up-to-date septic
Yes.
at the time. Okay, and I think the key thing here is the property is to remain vacant until the new system is installed. That's one of the conditions that has been put in?
Yes.
Okay.
And we wrote a letter to the fire department to that effect as well. The water meter's been pulled, utilities turned off.
Okay.
How soon do you think you're going to close?
Tomorrow.
Can you do it sooner? No, I'm joking.
But we actually had it scheduled to close last week,
Okay.
but because of the timing to get in front of you, we delayed it a week so
Okay.
that we didn't close before we came.
And then you've worked with your architect, so you know what you're doing, and the challenge is going to be getting the contractors to do it, right?
Yeah, of course. Time is what it'll be.
Okay. Nice.
So,
Well, you got a beautiful spot there, that's for sure.
yeah, we're really excited.
Yeah. Well, good luck with it.
Other questions from the board members?
No, I was just glad that they pulled the meter. And sometimes we ask them to do that, and they've already done it.
Correct.
That's good.
Yep.
It wasn't the last time, but it was last week.
Yeah. I don't remember the last time.
Any comments from the public? Okay, maybe we can, I think on this we can take a voice vote.
Need a motion?
Oh, yeah, need a motion.
I'll make,
Motion to approve.
And a second?
Second.
Okay, and then I guess, are the conditions, Judy, to read?
I would say that the condition would be that the new system be installed within 1 year of the date of transfer, or the owners return to the Board of Health for an extension of the variance, and that the property is to remain vacant until the new system is installed.
Okay. I think we can take a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right, that passes. You're all set.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the second variance hearing is for BK Enterprises Incorporated, 82 Jericho Lane, East Southeast LLC, and we have a presenter.
Good afternoon. For the record, Thad Eldridge, East Southeast. So the Oyster River Boatyard is what we're looking at today, or Orby. The site currently is served with a cesspool that's in the middle of the building. It may meet some of the setbacks that a septic system is supposed to meet, but certainly not to groundwater. We have a low site, so a high groundwater table. And I'll give you a moment to open it up if you'd like. Ready. So at the site, we have Oyster Pond River with all of the wetlands associated with it. We have a coastal bank on the neighboring property, mostly, and we also have an isolated wetland. The best and only spot we can really put a septic system is behind the building. That's a little bit of higher land. That will require filling in a little bit of floodplain. We're proposing the perk-right system, so we can put it 5 feet from the building. In order to meet the minimum flow required under Title V, we're putting the system 5 feet from the lot line, which is the variance that we're requesting. We have the septic tank and pump chamber located outside the 100-foot buffer from the isolated wetland. Some of that piping will be within the 100 feet, but otherwise, we are doing our best to get this system as far away from everything that matters as possible. We do have the 2 reserve areas that are necessary. Those are in the parking lot, and to construct them would require a lot of work with, they have to be high enough to be above the groundwater table, and those are parking areas. So that's a big project that we hope sewer is here before we have to worry about that. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Dick?
Yeah, I was watching a video about the perk-right system, and it appears that it's like an irrigation system, a drip irrigation system, with the pipes 8 inches or so below the surface.
About 6 inches down.
And my question is, how do you, if you have a drip irrigation system in your garden, you have to drain it in the winter. How do you prevent this from freezing?
It drains itself during its entire process, so.
So the pipes go back and forth and back and forth, like in a garden.
Yes, and there's a detail right up here of how the
Yeah.
pipe layout is.
Yeah.
The effluent comes out, goes to a septic tank, through a filter, into a pump chamber. It goes through their hydraulic unit, and from there, it charges up the system. I believe each emitter is 0.6 gallons per minute, and it just slowly wets the area around it. And then it drains everything off each time it doses.
It runs
So-
back, I mean, it puts suction on the system, or?
Yeah, it pulls everything right
Puts
out
suction on it.
afterwards,
So how fast does it go through these cycles,
when it needs to.
depending on how much effluent is coming?
Right, how many flushes there are.
Okay.
And then it drains off to where, when you say drains off?
Right, well, it actually goes back into the septic tank, so the little bit of oxidation that it'll pick up here will benefit with some denitrification, but nothing official.
So the liquid that's sitting around these drip holes in the pipe, if it's 5 below zero and it's freezing, and that whole area is freezing cold, that doesn't freeze.
They say that this works in Minnesota, so it should work here. The other thing, we do use this We use this system sometimes. There are times that we like to avoid using the system. When we need to, we do, especially when we need to be within 5 feet of a foundation. This is a seasonal use. Nobody's taking their boat out in the middle of winter, so.
Well, I asked the guy at the boatyard today, he says it's gonna use year-round.
Okay.
How good is the nitrogen reduction of this system compared to the other?
Well, it's all unofficial. There's no approval from the DEP that this system will reduce any nitrogen. Yes.
I just was going to say, I just so happened to see a presentation by George Hoyfelder last week at the DEP Title V seminar, and he studied these drip irrigations and compared them to some of the other types of systems like the FAST and recirculating sand filters and such, and these do almost as well, maybe even slightly better for nitrogen reduction, even without a treatment component beforehand, because you're getting all that biological action up in the soil, and it's taking it up into the grass or the vegetation, and then it gets emitted into the atmosphere. So they're very good.
Is it less expensive or more expensive than the other AIs?
Well, this isn't an AI, is it?
It's
Well-
considered an alternatives leaching area. It's an alternative,
Leaching area.
yes.
Right, when you go to the Innovative Alternative Program of the DEP, you'll see the leaching, you'll see denitrification, a few other categories of AI. We call AI just the denitrifying all too often. I don't know what the numbers are, and until that letter comes out from the DEP, it's great that it denitrifies more, but what's the official report that comes out of the DEP?
How can you be using it if it doesn't have the DEP approval?
It has the DEP approval for a leaching field. It doesn't have DEP approval for denitrification, and we're not seeking denitrification in this case, where if we could put a standard Title V septic without denitrification here, we technically could.
Okay. Okay.
So this system replaces the leaching field. It has a pump,
Hello?
Oh, that's doing that.
and it has a pump to pump the water out into the,
Okay,
into
so
the
that, I'm confusing this with a,
kind of hoses, but it's just a leaching field. So it's, I guess
Okay.
it would be more expensive for a leaching field, except it's so shallow. All you have to do is just still dig a very shallow trench,
yeah,
just 8 inches deep and lay the
okay,
tube
so
in.
I was confused.
This
Right.
is not an IA when you
Okay,
think
I
of
get
the
it.
standard
Doesn't-
innovative alternative for nitrogen removal. This is an IA for the leaching area.
As a
For
substitute
applications
for-
like this where you can't install a normal sized or a normal located
I get it now.
leaching system.
Thank you.
So it has approval for that. It doesn't have approval for nitrogen removal yet.
So this system is Title V compliant?
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And we've used the drip right in other locations in Chatham. Some people like it because you can basically, you don't have to dig up your whole yard to put a leaching system in.
Yep.
If you have a lot of trees, you can actually move the piping around the
All
trees
right.
and things like that. So those are the kind of applications where it's been used.
And Thad, so there are no bedrooms in this, in the boatyard buildings, is that correct?
Correct. There's an interior bathroom,
I said, bedroom, I said, I think.
but bathroom-wise, so
Okay, Art Spru is prison.
Who's that?
that's Art Spru. Art, what are you doing?
Yeah, and I don't even see him listed here.
Oh, wow, that's neat.
A wire is crossed.
Oh, okay.
Well, he's got good volume.
So, one bathroom,
So there's a bathroom at the first floor level for the employees. There's a bathroom at the second floor level for the employees. And then when COVID hit, prior to COVID, everybody with a slip was able to use that employee bathroom, one or the other. When COVID hit, they shut that down. They put
Chemical.
porta potties outside. And then now that all of that is lifted, the employees kind of like their privacy. They're talking about installing a bathroom over here for all the boat folk, and then they can have their private bathrooms.
Is there a particular type of ground cover that's commonly placed on top of these systems that help make it work by
Yes.
drawing up?
Some sort of grass, or we're proposing a wildflower meadow over it.
A what?
Wildflower meadow,
Okay.
so we'll get some butterflies out there.
Tomatoes.
He wants to go for the super big tomatoes.
How do you size the system?
If there's no
When
bedrooms,
when all the boat owners are using it?
So there are 47 slips and moorings as part of this marina. It's 10 gallon per day per slip for a marina,
Okay.
and with a minimum of 500 gallons per day.
Interesting. That's
minimum
interesting.
of 500 per day. Okay. Other questions from the board? Any questions from
I
the,
have just one, how many of these do we have in town?
I would say, since I've been here, we've probably put 10 or 15 of them in. I mean, they're pretty common.
No problem with them at all?
Not that I've heard, no.
The first one that we did was in Yarmouth, and the return lines weren't properly insulated, and it froze the first year. And then they went out, they insulated everything properly, it's been working fine since.
I think most of the ones we have in Chatham have a secondary treatment unit before them. And when you do that, you get other variants, or you can get closer to the groundwater or shrink the size of the leaching field. So oftentimes it's used for that reason. So
They need a contract for maintenance of this?
an annual inspection.
Everything.
Yep, annual inspection to make sure it's all working properly.
okay, questions from the public? Okay, can I get a motion
I'll make a motion, we approve.
I'll second it.
in a second? And then Judy can read the conditions?
So the system shall be installed and operated in accordance with the perk right general use approval pursuant to Title V, 310 CMR 15 issued March 15th, 2007, revised November 23rd, 2016. The applicant shall sign a covenant with the board agreeing to comply at such time as the town of Chatham, through its Board of Health and/or Board of Water Sewer Commissioners, directs the connection of this property to the municipal sewer when it becomes available. This covenant shall be recorded at the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds and submitted to the Board of Health. Throughout the life, the perk right system shall be under an O&M agreement. That agreement shall be for at least 1 year and may be with any Mass certified operator of the appropriate grade that has received training, and the system shall be inspected annually. The engineer shall submit an engineered as-built plan, including as-built elevations, with a written certification that the system has been installed in accordance with the approved plans, and this variance is granted pursuant to State Environmental Code Title V and the Town of Chatham subsurface sewage regulations, is valid for 1 year from the date of the Board of Health approval, and a permit must be issued and work commenced during that 1 year period, or the variance shall expire.
Okay, I think we can take a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that passes, so you have your variance.
Thank you so much.
When are they planning on doing this?
As soon as possible.
Okay.
We go to
So before
conservation.
July.
Yes, we go to conservation before this week. Some of the other perk rights around 154 Champlain Road, that was done because it was on a hillside, and you can beat the slope a little bit better with this over a conventional system. And 321 Ridgevale Road, and that was just a tight lot to get around the house and all of that. And that one we put down 2 feet deep is the maximum depth that it can go. It can't go down to 3. Interesting enough.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, our third is review discussion of the short-term rental regulation with town council. I think that Judy has sent out some minor revisions to the draft which was sent to all the board members. And then she also submitted some questions for Attorney Costello to look at, and he provided some responses here that I think Judy has sent out to you as well. And is Attorney Costello on the video? Or the hybrid?
I am, Chairman. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, thank you for being here. So, how should we start? Maybe you could just give us a sort of an overview of the short-term rental regulation as you saw it, and then you can go through each of the 4 questions that Judy addressed, which had been raised by the board before, and then I'm sure there'll be some questions from the board in addition to all that.
Sure, be happy to. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, the short-term rental regulation requires that those who operate short-term rentals in the town of Chatham register with the Board of Health, provide the salient information relative to the occupancy of the premises, the identity and contact information for the proprietors or owners, and it does require certainly that any such rental unit comply with all applicable state and local codes, regulations, etc. The regulation does provide that the registrations have to be listed on any real estate listing for rental of the subject property as an indicia that the property owner has in fact complied with the rental regulation. It otherwise provides that there be adequate maintenance of the premises, trash removal, etc. Occupancy requirements are limited to 2 occupants per bedroom plus 2 additional occupants. And a question was specifically raised as to whether or not the definition of occupants as set forth in the regulations would include minors or children, and in my view it does. It clearly indicates that any individual residing would be deemed an occupant, and that's non-age restricted, so I think it would apply to all folks, including children. The board has the right to suspend or revoke a rental certificate after conducting a public hearing with proper notice having issued for any violation of the registration requirements or any general law, bylaw, etc. It may also, in lieu of suspension or revocation, modify a rental certificate or impose additional conditions within the certificate. The regulation is enforceable under the non-criminal disposition provisions of general laws, Chapter 40, Section 21D, and Town General Bylaw, Section 1-7. Any owner found in violation of the provision of the regulation can be punished by a fine of $200 per day of ongoing violation. The regulation specifically states that each day that a violation continues shall be considered a separate offense for the purposes of the fines. The bylaw, I keep saying bylaw, the regulation as drafted is slated to go into effect for the 2024 rental season. So the first registration applicants would be submitting their applications on or before February 28th of 2024 for the rental season to commence in March 2024. A question was also raised as to whether or not the proposed effective date of the regulation, i.e. July 1, 2023, is appropriate or whether it should be modified. In my view, I see nothing wrong with pushing that date back to January 1, 2024, should the board deem that appropriate, because by the very express terms of Section 2, it wouldn't take effect until the spring of 2024 rental season. So that's just a general summary of what the regulation provides. It is, in my view, it's a prudent regulation in that it affords the board in the town notice of which units, rental units within the community are being utilized for short-term rentals. And it is consistent with provisions of general law relative to the taxation of such rentals, Chapter 64D. I believe it's sound. I believe it will be effective for the town. It does not go so far as many, not many others, but other regulations. I believe you could impose more stringent conditions upon the operators of such rental units, but I believe as an initial foray into this regulatory field, it does provide the town and the board with a legitimate database of information upon which you can make further policy decisions going forward. That being said, I'll address the specific questions that had been raised.
Let me just ask one thing, just in general. At a number of points through the regulations, mass law is quoted with different sections and chapters and all that. Is that something that you have checked, and that's all the correct, those are the correct references for the law?
Yes, yes, Mr. Chairman, any provision of statute, I would have double-checked, and
Okay.
they are appropriate. No, yes.
Good, then, yeah, go ahead with the different questions then.
Okay.
Can I just
Yep.
jump in for a second? There is an issue with under legislative intent and authority. I've referenced, I think, the incorrect section there, which I need to change because that's referencing sewer tie-ins, not general Board of Health authority. So I'll have to check that and send the corrected one to you, Pat, just to check for me. So that's incorrect.
Is that under this legislative intent and authority?
Under legislative intent authority, Chapter 83, Section 3 and 11, that's actually sewer tie-ins, I believe. And Bob brought that to my attention, and I corrected it further down in the regulation. But I didn't pick it up at that point, so that does need to be checked,
Okay.
so.
Yes, I did note that, and I did point out in the comments, just queried why the reference to sewer tie-ins was being made, because the substance of the regulation doesn't really affect sewer tie-ins at all, although the board certainly does have some authority in that vein. It wouldn't be applicable here.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, yep, the questions. The first one is about the dates.
Yes, yes. If it is in fact the intent of the board to defer our implementation of the regulation until the spring of 2024, as I said, I would see nothing inappropriate or in any way detrimental to deferring the effective date to January 1, 2024. It wouldn't affect any enforcement authority of the board under existing laws and regulations during the interim period. And since the deadline for submitting of registration applications is February 28th, I think an effective date of January 1 should give owners, operators ample time to file, unless the board would prefer to afford them more time in advance of the application deadline.
Yeah, I think, in my mind, my problem was the registration was going to begin early, like July of 2023, and that would give Health Department time to register all these people. And then the first year would begin February 28th, 2024 for that summer. Mm-hmm. So to my mind, it was, what's the date that people start to register or can start to register? And if they register in the summer, but they don't have to till the following March, what do we do with complaints in the fall and summer, which we don't really want to deal with yet because it's not really in effect? You understand, right, Mark?
I do, and that goes exactly to my point of if you felt that a more extensive period of time in advance of the registration deadline would be appropriate, by all means. That would be the board's prerogative to establish that expanded period. But I don't believe that where the regulation specifically states that it's intended to take effect for the spring 2024 rental season, I don't think it would have any negative or adverse impacts, on the board's enforcement authority in the interim period. So I'm seeing the detriment there.
So if Judy begins accepting registrations in July of 2023, then during that summer and fall, we wouldn't really be taking complaints based on these new regulations. That wouldn't start until,
The following.
that would be okay. We wouldn't be legally obligated to take complaints.
Right. By the express language of Section 2A, the bylaw wouldn't take effect until the rental season commencing in March of 2024. Accordingly, the registration aspect of the regulation is more or less strictly procedural, and it wouldn't impose any substantive obligations on property owners until that March 2024 rental season would commence. So the board would not be hampered or impaired. You would only be able to enforce such regulations, bylaws, statutes, et cetera, that are in effect right now. And I don't believe that an effective date of July 1, 2023 for this particular regulation would alter the substantive duties and obligations of any property owner until the 2024 rental season.
Okay, so Judy, do you have a question about, so the effective date at the end means when the regulations start, but within the regulations, we've explained when you have to comply with them and when you don't, and that's that date of February 28th. Bob?
Yeah, Pat, just to follow up and maybe for clarification, Section 3 requires that somebody include the registration number in any listing for the property. And that will be taking place in the fall and winter, fall 2023, winter 2024, if you will. So if we were to change the date of the regulation to January 1, 2024, wouldn't we therefore lose the summer 24 season? Because a lot of those properties would already be rented by then. I mean, that was part of the concern this year, was starting so late.
Okay.
We had already lost, if you will, the ability to get this in play for the 2023 season, because most places are rented, November, December, January, February. So that's why we started it in July 1st, to give people that were going to be doing that advertisement the ability to register, get that registration number, and then get it into their listing for the summer 24 season. And wouldn't that kind of fall apart if we went with a January 1, 2023 date?
Yes, I see your rationale there, and I do agree with you. Given the early listings of prospective rentals, that it would make sense to impose this requirement effective on a date prior to the listings of these properties for rent. So I agree.
But Bob, since you would be able to register up until February 28th of 2024, we probably couldn't require the registration number to be well, would we be able to require it to be available for that following summer 2024? Because they may have registered in the fall and before they could.
They may have rented in the fall without that registration number,
Yeah.
yes. But, the only way to address that would be to say, starting July 1, 2023, you've got to include that registration number, or September 30th or some period of time. I mean, you may catch most people that will register far enough in advance to be able to put it in their ads for 2024 season, but there may be some people, most of the commercial agents that do this would know that, okay, if I'm renting in 24, I've got to get this number in the fall. The individual citizen that's doing it on themselves, they probably aren't necessarily using a listing service anyway. But, there may be at a period of time where you wouldn't catch, there were listings without the registration number because they have until March 1st to get that number.
Okay. Dick, you have a question?
Well, yeah, I mean, I was address pretty much the same question. If people have already rented their properties now for next year and may have rented them in November for next year, and if they have a 4-bedroom house and they've rented it and they have a deposit for 12 or 14 or 16 occupants, how are we gonna deal with that? You know, if in February, we say, okay, now you have to register, and the limit for a 4-bedroom house is 10 people. Well, we've already got a deposit for 16 people for that house. With a house on Barcliff, we have a deposit for 20 people in a 5-bedroom house. So somehow we have to notify people right away that this regulation is going into effect, and that they're going, regardless of whether they're registered or not, they're gonna have to follow these rules. And if they've taken a deposit for 20 people in a 5-bedroom house, they're gonna have to refund their deposit.
And reconfigure.
But I think that part of the plan was, if the effective date is July 2023, that's when there'd be public education and notifying the public and letting them know that this is coming down the road, and they have to get things in order, and they may have to work things around a little bit. I think that's, I think that's what you,
I mean, that's what my thought was.
because we don't want to let them be able to get out of it.
We don't even know the names of all the people who are renting in July of '23, because we haven't done the registry yet. So how are we gonna notify all of these people?
Well, it'll be public notification.
Yeah, I mean,
And I think the public relations part of it is sort of yet to be determined, but it'll have to be a whole host of things, but
part of our working
Outreach.
group was to recommend some marketing around this subject and making sure that if it goes into effect July 1, that the word gets out there right away, that people know that if they're renting for the following summer, 2024, then they need to, take into account the new regulation.
And then we need to be able to be open to registration applications as soon as the renters have a need to do so,
Yes.
right? With the understanding that all must do so by February 28th,
Right.
2014,
Yeah.
2024.
Currently-
But if somebody is doing a push, say in September,
We need to be ready.
we need to have our system up and ready and welcome applications for registration that early to accommodate their needs.
Right, well, as soon as it's published that this is the regulation, our system should be ready to be, to take
Activated.
registrations
Right.
and just move forward with it, I mean, we should be.
well, I think, as I read it, that the date to start accepting things will be the July 1st. But
Exactly.
It's a new system that's going to be put in place, and there's going to be a ramp-up time, and this, it's going to take a while to get things ironed out.
But that's
Town did it, and someone who worked there said it took them 4 years to sort of get this thing all together, so there'll be some glitches there.
But it's good to open it in July, because that spreads our ability to ramp up and learn and get better and better at it, with the big push probably coming in February, right, or January.
Okay, then maybe Attorney Costello could move on to this question 3 about the fines and all. And I had one big question. So ours says $200 a day. Suppose the person is in violation for 10 days. I mean, are you then over the $1,000 and you go to the criminal complaint thing and all that? Or how does it work with cumulative days?
It's the
Above the
discretion.
200 per day.
Judy has the discretion of whether deciding one day and waiting for them to respond.
Well, I was asking the attorney.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I think the nominal figures that I had referenced in my answer to the question relate to the individual unit fine. So a cumulative fine of $200 over a 10-day period would be collectible by non-criminal disposition. It's not the cumulative amount of the fine.
Okay, so it's a
that's determined.
per day fine, okay.
Yes.
Now, with regard to the penalties, we listed revocation of the permit or suspension of the permit, but we don't really state what the trigger is for the board to consider that. And before, I had suggested that after 3 days or 4 days of $200 fines, then that would trigger the board to consider immediate suspension of the permit. Because if you just keep charging $200 a day to a rental agency that's charging $15,000 a week, that's laughable. They'll pay the $200 a day for the whole summer and still make a ton of money. And, we need to use the revocation and suspension option. And I think we should let it be known that after 3 days or 4 days of fines, if the violation continues, then the next step will be a board meeting to consider suspension. And then the question is, how do we deal with a suspended license? If a person in July is renting a 4-bedroom house to 15 people, and after a week of that, and, they continue to do it, and we decide to suspend their permit, what happens then? How do we deal with that property? I mean, can we put a padlock on the door and say this unit is considered in violation of the Board of Health regulation and and can't be occupied by rental? And what is the approach? Because otherwise, we have regulations without any teeth. And when people are making $15,000 or $20,000 a week, there's a tremendous incentive to ignore minor penalties like a $200 a day fine.
I understand what you're saying. Let me ask Attorney Costello. Under the suspension, modification, or revocation of rental certificate, the language is Board of Health may suspend or revoke after a hearing.
Right.
For any violation of any provision of this procedure. That seems to me that you're giving the Board of Health the ability to use their discretion for each and every case.
Yep.
Based on fines and problems, and they can use their own discretion. Is that correct?
That is correct. And typically, suspension, modification, and revocation provisions with regard to regulations such as this do allow some level of discretion within the board to determine the particular circumstances involved with a particular property and to act either, immediately if you deem the public necessity requires, or to defer suspension revocation based on certain circumstances that may apply. But I agree with your assessment, Mr. Chair. The board could suspend, revoke upon any violation, whether it's a single $200 fine, a single day's operation without the appropriate registration certificate. Under that provision of the regulation, that is enough to allow you to proceed with a revocation or suspension proceeding. And while there may be some thought that assessing fines for violations of the regulation is ineffective, it's certainly an incentive for the property owner to comply because it has some financial impact. But the fact of the matter is the far greater financial impact on these property rental owners is the prospect of losing the registration,
Right.
which would legally prohibit them from continuing to rent these particular units. So I think that's where the real hammer comes down.
And so, does that mean, to my mind, that we don't have to specify the exact cascading levels of when we do what? In fact, we might be better off not putting
Yes.
in there and using our discretion.
I don't
Because
think-
at first, we may decide we don't want to do anything because
Yes.
it's just a mix-up. People didn't hear about it or whatever. Be kind of gentle at the beginning.
I don't think we want to specify anything.
Well, would a reasonable approach?
I'd ask the attorney, does that sound like?
That is correct. I agree with that assessment, and I do think it's an appropriate approach to this particular regulation, particularly as it's being, initiated for the first time.
Dr. Duncanson?
Pat, to kind of follow along with Dr. Edwards' question, if someone is found to be in violation, and, we start fining them $200 a day, and after a week, they're still doing it, I assume that the board's next step would be to go to court, right?
No, well, the next step would be to schedule a public hearing to consider suspension, modification,
Okay,
revocation.
but all right, so then the board suspends that property's registration certificate, and the property owner continues to do it because, as Mr. Edwards said, you know, they're making $15,000, $20,000 a week, so they really don't care. The next step would be then court action, correct?
That's correct, and we could file either a civil or a criminal proceeding, Bob. Given the fact that this would be a violation of the Board of Health regulation, criminal sanctions could be sought. You could also file a civil action and seek an injunction to prevent the property owner from continuing its illegal use of the premises.
Okay.
Can you give us any sense of what the timeline would be there? If we had someone come in for a hearing, and if they did come in and they said, okay, we'll stop doing what we're doing, and then they don't, and we decide to go for an injunction to get to prevent them from continuing to rent the property, how long would it take from the time the board made that decision until we could potentially get an injunction?
An injunction could issue relatively soon after filing a complaint in court. What I would suggest is, first and foremost, you would have to fully exhaust your administrative remedies under the regulation, which would be to issue fines and/or conduct a public hearing and issue an order revoking or suspending. If that order revoking or suspending the registration is not complied with or is disregarded by the property owner, you could go to court by filing a complaint, as I said, either in a criminal or civil proceeding, and to the extent an injunction is sought, an injunction motion could be filed with the complaint. A hearing on an injunction could typically be scheduled within a week or 10 days from the date of filing of the complaint. And a court could issue a preliminary restraining order or a temporary injunction from the bench if it deems cause exists. So I guess to answer your question, we could have arguably an injunction issued by a court, I would say conservatively within 30 days of the board's issuance of an order suspending or revoking.
Judy?
Okay, I have a question. Okay, so someone rents their property for 2 weeks and they are not in compliance. So we fine them and they come in for a hearing, but in the next 2 weeks, they are in compliance. So they come for the hearing, but yet they have the other 2 weeks already rented out and maybe 2 weeks after that, but those weeks are all in compliance. So what happens to the one time, but they're not in compliance?
Well,
How do you do
therein, that's where the board has to really weigh its options and its level of discretion. I mean, if a registration is suspended or revoked, then those subsequent rentals legally cannot take place. They cannot be effective. So I think imposing a suspension or revocation really does have significant financial consequences for a property renter. And I think that's something the board, has in its favor. You do hold that discretion. The typical approach, even though, as someone noted earlier, this particular regulation does not lay out a graduated enforcement schedule, if you will, first offense X, second offense Y. It does give you the option to weigh the severity of the public impacts of a violation and to go either light or to take more significant measures such as a suspension or revocation upon as little as one violation. So therein, you're going to build your body of knowledge and expertise based on the circumstances that are presented to you. And as always, when enforcing regulations, consistency is the key. You should enforce the regulation in a consistent manner, treat all renters the same.
Okay, thank you.
So within the board's discretion, then we can take case by case and weigh all these things together and come up with our own opinion. But we have to be careful about precedent, because
Yes.
once we do it one way, then.
Yes.
So we could initially send a letter to the owner saying, you have more occupants than you're allowed, you're gonna be fined $200 a day, you need to stop immediately. The next step would be, you haven't stopped, so you come before the board for a hearing. And at the hearing, they can say, oh, we're terribly sorry, starting tomorrow, we're gonna follow all the rules. And we can say, okay, fine, you follow all the rules, but if you do what you were doing again, then we will meet as a board and we will move to suspend your license. And if they don't show up for the hearing, we could just suspend their license based on their inability to show, and then just proceed rapidly through the other. Because if we don't do these things, then the regulations will have no.
But the key word there, Dick, was could. I mean, I think we weigh each one as we go along. Let me ask one other question. Did you have a question?
No, I'm fine,
Okay, so somebody is not doing things right, we send them a letter, and then they come in for a hearing. What do we need as, sort of evidence for our action? Do we just use our judgment from what we've heard? We have a series of complaints. Do we have to do inspections? Do we have to have somebody go out and document things, photographs, or is it like a court of law, or is it just our discretion based on the overall input that we've had?
I would suggest, Mr. Chairman, it's the latter, but you do have to have effective enforcement techniques. Your agents, those delegated by the board to enforce the bylaw, should have comprehensive reports based on inspections, observations of activities of the property. The board should have something, material and concrete before it, when ordering sanctions or fines or suspension or revocations. But this is not a court of law. No such standard of evidentiary proof is required. It's an administrative proceeding wherein the board has discretion to consider all the facts and circumstances presented to it, and to render its finding or determination based on those facts.
Let me ask
The regulation lists.
Let me ask just as a point, would you advise us to have more than just complaints that come in, logged in, more than a phone call? You could have a cranky neighbor, somebody is going out of their way to make a problem.
You gotta have more than that.
Where do we,
Yeah.
where's the line in there for us?
Yeah, I think a complaint is nothing more than an indication to the board or its agents that there may be an issue, and I stress the word may.
Right.
You do have to follow up on complaints by appropriate enforcement investigations and so forth. And you should have, as I say, a written report or citation, documentation from your agent indicating that there was in fact a violation at the premises. The period of time over which the violation occurred is certainly something that would be very useful in documented reports. That type of information is, as opposed to a mere complaint, is what the board's going to have to rely upon to render effective enforcement.
Carol?
Okay, are these things that can be determined after we pass the regulation? Like if we get the regulation passed, and then we can, start looking at what happens if and make parameters for that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest standard that a reviewing court hypothetically would apply here is whether the board's actions were deemed to be arbitrary or capricious or unsupported by evidence. So to the extent, I'm not sure exactly what your staffing level and the availability of enforcement agents is going to be. That's a significant factor, and that's why there's no more definitive statement of the level of evidence needed. You have to rely upon the resources that you have available to you, and the board in its collective wisdom just has to make judgments based upon the regulation as to when sanctions are appropriate.
So we have an outline that will let us begin implementing the regulation, and then we can adjust it as we go along, I'm assuming.
I've got,
You certainly could. I would suggest that having something in black and white that could hamstring you somewhat, because then if you have a document that you utilize for graduated enforcement of the regulation, to the extent that for whatever reason you choose not to adhere strictly to that document, you could create an argument in the favor of a property owner indicating that you're acting arbitrarily or capriciously and not following your own. But I think for the time being, you're going to have to gauge what the level of compliance is in the town once the regulation goes into effect, and how and to what extent the violations that you're made aware of and that you can document are impacting, public health, safety, which is your primary mission to protect, and then go from there. I think you're better off for the time being just playing it by ear, so to speak, until you can sense what the level of infractions might be. But if you wanted to put together some informal guidance for our chairman to utilize when working with other board members and advising them on procedures for these hearings, I could certainly work with you in that regard. But I would just caution about having, for the time being, anything fully documented in writing with a strict schedule of fines or enforcement measures, just until you can get a sense as to the potential nature of violations.
So we,
John?
oh, go ahead.
okay, Pat, I've got a question. Within our new regulations, there's a section under parking. And it talks about disallowing cars being parked in a way that impedes traffic or traffic safety. Now, my question is this. If we want to rely upon the police to help decide whether a condition triggers that, do we have to add the police to have the additional enforcement authority on this public health regulation?
I believe it would be helpful to have officers of the police department delegated to as enforcement agents for that very reason. And when I saw the language on parking, I did assume that those restrictions were based on pre-existing bylaws or regulations that were in effect in the town by the way it was drafted. And in order for a police officer to enforce the parking or traffic regulations, he doesn't need to have designation as an enforcement agent hereunder, but for purposes of enforcing this regulation and imposing fines and/or laying the groundwork for a potential suspension or a revocation of a registration certificate, then a police officer should be designated as an enforcing agent if you wish to utilize his or her testimony in a hearing.
Okay. So, makes sense to me. I don't know what others think, but if we wanted to have the potential to have an officer help us with the enforcement of this section, parking, of our regulation, then we need to incorporate wording in this regulation, granting enforcement authority to the town police.
Yeah, it sounds like we need to get some input from the police as to what they can and can't do and what they're willing to do.
The alternative would be for us to simply defer over any.
The police,
Yeah.
Don't the police
don't
do
know
that
what they'll
anyway?
do.
they're already under the non-criminal disposition, able to enforce, I think, as well as the harbor master's office.
Yeah, and we frequently add, you have a number of other regulations where members of the police department are along
Mentioned.
with
So we can
Judy
add
and
that.
your agents and all. there's a broader group of people that can actually do the enforcement. So we can put that similar
So-
language in here.
And don't the police do that anyway, as far as if someone calls and said that there are cars blocking the street or things like this?
They use
go
their
out-
own authority.
Pardon me?
They use their own authority
Right.
to invest. If we wanted them to reference a violation of our regulation, they've got to be empowered to have the authority.
So if we call them and say, we have a complaint
We
and
have to write it into here.
into that, okay.
Yeah, and we could do that, because like I say, we have them in a number of your other regulations that they have.
Wording in the other
Yeah,
ones.
the
we can
wording's
do.
pretty broad, if you will.
And then that would allow Judy to refer a complaint to the police if it had to do with parking in her discretion?
Yes.
Exactly.
And then Attorney Costello, does that sound what you've heard in terms of?
It does. It sounds like the most comprehensive way to address it with police department involvement and prior notification to them of their role. But as I read section 7 again, the parking section, if the board becomes aware, whether or not a police officer has been specifically delegated with enforcement authority, if you become aware that there have been a number of violation notices issued for illegal parking in the premises, and you ultimately determine that as a result of that activity, there is not adequate parking for the property, that in and of itself could be deemed a violation of the regulation.
Dick, did,
With regard to the evidence that we would need for a violation, the regulation has a sentence in there that states that when the owners sign up for this registration, they agree to inspection. How do we interpret that? Does that mean that Judy or her delegate or a member of the board can go to a house that has 18 cars parked in the front lawn and knock on the front door and say, I'm a member of the Board of Health and I'd like to inspect your property and see how many people are sleeping in this property? What capability does the board have of inspecting these properties to determine if they're in violation?
You can always ask. There's no question that, the hypothetical you just stated, you could have an agent go to the premises and request an inspection for compliance purposes. Boards of health do, by law, have the authority to enter upon properties for making inspections where the public health, safety, or well-being is threatened. I would strongly recommend that you gain, whenever possible, the consent of the property owner to inspect premises. And if that consent is denied, that we discuss it to determine whether a warrant would be necessary or whether or not you have the right to enter upon the property. But I certainly think that obtaining a court warrant when in doubt is always the safest way to go when a property owner refuses to allow access to a property for inspection purposes.
I would think that if there's a complaint about parking numbers, for instance, wouldn't an appropriate first thing be for Judy to call the owner or the person that's already always available and say, your property, you signed the affidavit, you know the rules, would you please correct this?
Yes.
And,
Correct.
and then go from there. Does that,
I
Judy?
mean, this is not unlike any of the other regulations that we enforce all the time, the food code or sewer connection, right, anything. I mean, we always contact the owner, talk things out, educate, document if we, if we ask them for an inspection. I mean, 99% of the times they're gonna say, sure, let's go in, my tenants are leaving on such and, we can get in there on that date in
Yep.
between, and I can show you around, and, parking is probably gonna be a little bit more problematic, but if it becomes a continued, problem with continued complaints, then we would, note it and then ask them, send them a letter, and then have them in for hearing, and, every case is gonna be a little different, so, I don't envision we're gonna have a lot of these types
Right.
of hearings.
That would be part of your discretion, our discretion, and you
Right.
could document everything, so there'd be a record that would
Right.
be a part of things.
I usually send an order letter, and that goes a long way.
There really isn't anything in this paragraph on parking that isn't already something that the police would take note of. If, overnight parking isn't allowed in Chatham, parking that obstructs the road isn't allowed.
Right.
But the thing that's so nebulous is the word adequate on-site parking shall be provided. So if they have 20 cars parked on their front lawn, they'll say, okay, that's adequate. Our front lawn is
That's up to the
adequate for
property
parking.
owner.
Right, so we really have nothing to do about parking. They can park all over the place as long as they don't park on the street.
Yep.
And, I don't think that's right. I think that's really degrading the.
I wouldn't quite interpret it that way. I think it's up to you guys as the Board of Health to determine that it's adequate, not the property owner.
Well, maybe it
If you drive by a house,
Maybe it should say appropriate. instead of
if you
that.
guys drive by a house and there's 20 cars parked on the front lawn, I think the way it's worded, it's up to this board to determine whether or not that's adequate. Is it impacting the abutters, the property in a negative way? That's your discretion, if you will.
Right.
And remember, the rest of the language in that paragraph came from the police department. That was
Okay.
the language that they provided to us on the issue.
All right.
Adequate just means the property's big enough to put those.
Well, no, but if it turns out that they're parking cars over the septic system.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Because a lot of houses,
What if you
there's
set up-
septic systems in the front yard. If they're parking cars over the septic system, you may determine that's not adequate.
Well, what if you use the word appropriate or adequate and appropriate? Because that, I don't know.
Certainly can make that change if
We've
you
got an
want to.
attorney here who can parse words, but I worry about the word adequate.
You can certainly add those other words if you want to. It's your regulation. And remember,
Yeah.
this still has to go to a public hearing where you'll hear from the rest of the community's
Right.
comments, which you haven't really heard yet. The parking work group did, but you haven't heard specifically on this, or in your regulation.
One thing that helps, Dick, I think, is that the owner has read through all these rules and regulations, and they've signed something, so they're aware of it. So if Judy calls, there's, I think, more of an effect. And I think the vast majority of people will sort of comply. But I don't know if the attorney is on a time schedule here, so we want to, in terms of how long we can ask you questions, but let us know. Can I move on to another topic here real quick?
Yep.
It's the paragraph on a contact person. It says, who is able to respond in person to any emergency that arises during occupancy within 1 hour. So does that mean that we're requiring that somebody physically be on the property, or is that a phone call, or dealing with it, or, because if we say they have to physically be there, that's a big thing.
Yeah, that's how it reads, Mr. Chairman. I would suggest that that's a fair reading of that requirement.
How do these usually work? Are there suggestions, or?
I mean,
It's
In person.
third page at the top.
Of trash removal.
Page 3 at the top. It's it could be contact within 1 hour. That's one thing, calling the owner. That's not quite as strict. But I'm just wondering, the way it's written, are we then sort of forcing every owner who's not living on the Cape to hire some kind of a local agent?
Well, the way I read it, Mr. Chairman, is the language is, let's be clear for the record, the operator or operator's agent must be able to respond in person to any emergencies that arise during occupancy within 1 hour of contact by the town's health division or police. I think respond in person means that contact person would merely have to personally reach out, whether it's by physical appearance or by contact to the renters, to undertake some response. I don't believe that it requires him or her or it to physically be there.
So it could be a phone call contact.
It could be a phone call.
It would be respond in person,
That's
they
what
could
the
do it by
intent
phone call.
was. That was what the intent was, that you should be able to get in touch with somebody.
So
within
my
an
question
hour.
would be, the language that's there, does that reflect Judy's intent that it could be done by a phone call?
No, that
Oh,
says in
sure, yeah.
person.
Yeah, we could just remove.
Respond in person.
Remove in person. That would
Right.
solve the problem.
Right.
Respond
Yeah, that
within
would
1
be
hour.
good. That sounds good.
In person suggests they gotta be standing there.
Right.
And also
They'd
So
have to be
let's
located in
scratch it in
Chatham.
person.
So just say respond within 1
to
hour.
respond.
To any emergencies within 1 hour. I like that. That makes more sense.
Does that sound reasonable, Attorney Costello? Yeah.
It does. Eliminating the term in person, I don't think changes the substantive
Okay,
meaning of the clause, yeah.
okay.
Okay, and Judy, that was your intent, I mean,
I think that's what we discussed in the group.
because it's,
Yeah.
otherwise
We
you'd
agreed to that
you'd
earlier.
be forcing
It
every
didn't
single owner
translate into this change.
Right.
to hire a local rental agency, which I don't think was our intent.
it doesn't have to be.
Or could it be a
It doesn't
neighbor?
have to
Could be a
rental,
neighbor.
rental agency,
We-
it
we
could be the
talked
neighbor.
about- we talked
Could be
about
the
a neighbor.
Right.
You know,
Exactly.
Right.
it just had to be somebody. But
The owners.
I don't have any issue with taking out in person either. I understand the intent.
Yep.
And I also understand the concern about it, so I think.
Yep.
So if it's available by phone call, that would be, yeah, okay.
Respond. Right.
You just want to talk to the person, not
Right.
a secretary who doesn't know anything about it.
Right.
You
The
wanna
owner
talk to the
signed
person.
an affidavit, so they're on notice. I had one other question that just sort of came up. The owner can be any entity. It can be, an LLC, a trust. It can be a business. It can be a fund, investment fund. It could be a rental agent that owns houses. Is that correct?
That is correct, yep.
Okay, and there's no handle on that. That's,
Well, town council did change owner to read any person or entity.
or entity, right?
Broaden it.
So there's,
Yeah. That was.
is there a way to, no, that has to be, is there a way to narrow that down? I don't think we want to, but I mean,
Yeah, no, I think that covers the gamut of potential types of ownership entities. One thing we can't do is require how or in what capacity property is held in ownership. That's up to the individual property owners, that's their right to establish ownership entities in accordance with applicable laws. So I think by modifying the definition of operator and operator's agent to include any person or entity, pretty much covers the type of ownership entity we may encounter.
all right, good. Other questions by board members? Judy or Dr. Duncanson, a question for? All right, here's the question I always ask. What have we forgotten about? What should we ask about? What don't we know that you need to tell us?
Well, I think given the scope of regulation that,
Wait, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Dave.
Go ahead.
Given the scope of the regulatory activity that the board has chosen to undertake here, I think this is a pretty solid regulation. As is always the case, so when a town board or agency is adopting regulations in a new area, I think it's best not to overreach initially. I think your best approach would be to establish your regulation in a relatively simple, straightforward manner. So first of all, it's easily understandable by those subject to the regulation. And secondly, so that you can adapt and develop your enforcement mechanisms and application procedural mechanisms accordingly. And I think this is good. I think it's a sound approach. I think, as I said at the outset, it will provide you with a very significant and helpful database on rental properties within the town. And for the reasons we've discussed, I do think you have adequate enforcement measures in there. You know, there is a specific provision, I believe, in the regulation that requires review after, I think, 3 years. Is it? Yeah, 3 years.
Yep.
So you have a mandatory review period, at which point in time you can look back, which is much more constructive than projecting into the future in terms of specific terms and conditions of the regulation and modify it accordingly. So I feel comfortable with it based on the input you've provided.
Yeah, to my mind, it's not a matter of if we'll make changes as we go along, and they may be early if necessary. It's just a matter of when. I mean, there'll be some that we make, for sure, I think. But Any other question? Bob, did you?
Just one topic that the board hasn't touched on that we did ask of town council, and that was with regard to the definition of occupant. I know that was a topic of discussion at the previous meeting.
He said-
Town council had weighed in that he felt that occupant was broad enough to cover any age.
Yep.
But we did offer a suggestion that maybe we add any age, and an occupant is an individual of any age. Does the board want to go that, or are you comfortable with just keeping the definition as it currently is, which doesn't reference age?
Yeah, I think Dick made the comment that some people might assume they can bring a kid, and we won't.
Right, I think it
Right
would
up
be
front.
best to make it clear, because what we don't want to have is in July of next year, somebody coming with their 2 children and saying, well, you know, you go to VRBO, you go to anywhere, children of 2 years old are not considered
But it's very easy to
occupants. So if we just put it there,
Children included.
children of,
So we would
persons
say
of any
an
age.
occupant is an individual of any age.
Of
Right,
any
yes,
age.
Right, and then we won't have
I
that.
see Attorney Costello shaking his head.
Yes.
Yes.
That's fine, correct, yeah.
Okay. Now, do we put public comment for this?
Not yet.
Do we normally
Hold on.
do public comment for,
You can, sure, if you want.
okay, public comment?
Elaine, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. And, a couple things. By the time you are going to be ready to enforce this, all of the homeowners will have filed their forms, exactly what the ground rules are. They know what the fines. I think what's going to be important for violation, I think it's going to be really important to enforce it. If you don't, it's going to spread real quickly. That don't worry about it. It's not, they're not going to do anything. It's on the books. I would liken it to conservation, where, they have really clear fines about cutting down trees, and they have enforced it. And guess what? Very few people cut down trees anymore, that is noticeable to the public, because they know they're going to be fined. They know it's enforceable. And I would hope that that would be sort of the situation here, that everybody knows the rules and they don't do it because the real estate agents will find out they're not going to be, if they found out it's in violation. I don't think we want to go down the path of making an appointment necessarily, because by the time you make the appointment, everybody's gone and, they're going to clear out. And to get into a situation with warrants and such, situation, I don't think we want that. We just want people to understand that these are the rules and regulations, and we expect them to be enforced. And if you don't, there are going to be, penalties. So that's all I have. My phone's ringing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, I think that's been terrific help for us. Carol, did you have?
I think we have every intention of enforcing the rules that we set down and the regulations and things like this. So as we go forward,
Hopefully, we'll have the extra person funded. We'll know at town
Exactly.
meeting for sure, 100%. And I think the timing of this whole thing, when we do another revision and we do a public hearing and then we meet again, we're pretty much going to be mid-May, maybe, when we actually vote this through, and we'll know we have a person, so that will work out okay, I think.
when do you think we'll have the first public hearing?
Well, that was going to be my question. I mean, I think you've just made some minor changes here tonight. I think you could easily set a date for a public hearing tonight.
Would it normally just be, we would convert a meeting to a public hearing?
Yeah, or you could have a public hearing within a meeting. You don't have to have a separate meeting. It would just be one of your agenda items.
Do we need to have one more meeting and sort of look at the revisions that Judy puts in the whole thing and then vote that and then have the public, the next
No.
meeting after that?
No.
Only a
No?
few changes.
Okay.
I think the
So we
changes
can-
are
so we
minor
can-
enough.
So we could make minor changes, send it out to everybody, okay.
Just a couple things. March 20th is, we have 3 variances already. April 3rd, I am away, but doesn't, and there's already
Well,
2 hearings on there. 17th.
I'm envisioning that we won't probably make the final short-term rental regulation vote. Well, I mean, there's a question, after the town meeting, then we know we have the funding for the extra person that'll enable us to administer this thing. If we don't have that person, we may, I don't know, that's kind of a,
Well, usually at the public hearing, you can vote at that time to adopt or not at that public
Well,
hearing.
we may want to have a meeting and discuss everything that's brought up.
That's
and make a
fine.
final
So
Yeah,
you would
you don't have to vote the night of the
No.
public hearing. You can simply have the public hearing, get all the public input, then go back at a subsequent meeting, talk about what you heard, make any changes or not, you know.
Yeah,
But
I think
if-
we should.
Why don't we do the final revision on March 20 and the public hearing on April 3?
It
And
has
the
to be
devil, the
advertised.
devil in the details is gonna be the getting the information.
What's the,
And finding out how many people are staying I mean, if we had a number of automobiles, one car per house, per bedroom or whatever, that would be easy. You drive by, you count the cars. How are we gonna know how many people are in these rental units? We can suspect that they're way over the number, but how are we gonna know enough to be able to come and have a fine or whatever? This is gonna be the big problem in this. And if we had a number of cars in this regulation, you know, even if it was a fairly large number, you know, one car per bedroom plus two or something like that, at least then there's something you could easily go, take a picture, and there's 10 cars, and they're clearly in violation. If we don't do that, it's gonna be very, very hard to come up with.
Don't you think we'll learn about that as we go forward, once we start hearing it and things like this? If we get the regulation passed, and then we can always adjust it, maybe, see how it goes with the cars?
Yeah, I think,
understand where you're coming from, but
so back to the point, maybe Judy and Diane can put together some dates and send it out to the board, and then people can reply if they're available, or how
We have
should
to
we do it?
advertise for a public hearing
How much time do you need to advertise?
2 weeks before.
Usually 2 weeks, but I think we have
So
plenty
maybe
of time to
two
get a
meetings.
hearing date on the 3rd,
Two meetings from here would be a good time.
April 3rd, April 3rd?
April
I
3rd.
don't have a calendar.
I think that's,
April 3rd, okay, so that sounds good,
we'll send that tentatively tonight and we'll confirm it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And, okay, so I would just say that I agree with Attorney Costello that we have a good basic start, and we'll build on that. The working group was a broad group of community people that came to a compromise and a consensus, and I sort of personally think that it's probably best for us to largely follow what the working group produced, and then go from there as we get information and registration and input comes in. If there's ongoing parking problems, then the beauty of a regulation is we can change it relatively easily. Okay, other questions for the attorney? Okay, I think that's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
I think
Pat.
that was very helpful to us.
Have a great night, folks.
Good night.
Thank you, Pat.
Judy, so you are leaving the effective date July 1st?
I think that's what we.
And then you can start
I believe that's what we
registration.
agreed on, and then
All right.
we can start registration, make sure our format is
Then you have the
correct,
registration
and
up
have
to February
that time.
28th, and then, yeah, I think the last language
I
was
mean, my big concern was that there would be some issue with that lag time in between, but he seems to feel that we have enough existing rules. If things come up, we can address them
Okay.
from that point.
great. I think that's a lot, and then you can send out the revisions to everybody, and then people can reply back with some time if there's some problem with what you've done with this.
For the next meeting, I can give you the
Oh, the
revisions.
next meeting, right, we'll have a meeting, okay, right, got it.
Just, I want to make sure I have this straight, because we've been hopping around on this.
Yep.
It's clear to me that as of July 1st, 2023, registrations will be opened, right?
Yes.
And then over that subsequent period between there and February 28th, 2024, all the registration applications should be submitted by then.
In order to do a short-term rental for the summer of 2024,
Right.
yes.
But, again, we are not going to be enforcing the terms of this regulation in August, September, October, November, December of 2023.
Correct.
Okay. It really only becomes effective and enforceable in the spring of 2024. Do we have an actual date
Basically March 1st of
Which is-
2024.
Yes,
Okay,
that's when
which
the-
So if somebody goes to rent, have a short-term rental and they advertise it on March 1st of 2024 and they don't have their rental registration number in their posting, they're in violation.
Okay, fair enough, got it.
Do you want to take
Good.
this one person from the public with their hand up?
Public comment?
Nicole Stern?
Yes, yes, thank you. I've been thinking about the registration time. Seems that there would be a lot of confusion. Would you consider making the registration time from July to December with the understanding that it's for the short-term rental season for 2024 and that all ads for 2024 would have to be, the numbers for the ads would have to be part of it. So you're eliminating the February or March, basically just saying, this is our 6-month registration time, and within that registration, it's for all summer rentals at 2024, and all registration numbers in ads needs to be in the 2024. I think that's, I mean, you can use different words, but I think that's less confusing than going to February, and now you're setting another time. And yes, it could be effective or for all rentals beginning. I think that if you just say all short-term rentals for 2024, I don't even think you have to say July. Any short-term rentals. And I don't think most people will do short-term rentals until the summer, but some do it in June.
I think.
Anyway, I think that would be less confusing.
I understand what you're saying, and one of the reasons I didn't do it by December 31st was because it coincides with all of our other permitting, so I was trying to give us some time to separate all of that registration process, so we had.
The rental year is going to be March 1 to March 1. So
Right.
we're gearing everything up for that date.
I mean,
And
realistically.
there'll be has to be a big public information thing. There's going to be some confusion. We're going to have to,
Plus, it'll be a rolling thing, too. I think we're gonna continue to get
and there'll be
registrations as,
people didn't
after
know,
the
they
fact.
forgot
and-
this and that. So it'll be probably, yes. But I think
Right.
the big thing is the rental year is March 1 to March 1.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, I
It's a good
understand
thought,
that,
though.
but there was also, I don't know whether Dr. Bob brought it up, but somebody brought up about having the registration numbers. And I think that's where your confusion is gonna come if you don't cut it off at a certain point. I mean, it doesn't even have to be December 31st. I mean, everyone's renting in the summer. It could even be December 1st. I mean, how long does it take all these companies and individuals that are working with other rental companies to get it, that for 2024, you need that registration number on your ads. You want to put your ads out, in November? Well, you've already been notified that you have to be registered and that number has to be on your ads. Anyway, just a thought. Don't want to confuse things anymore, but thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So the way we have it now, there will be an 8-month window
Yes.
for renters
Yes.
to apply and obtain their certificates, as early as July 2 and as late as February 28th,
Yes.
which is very generous, I think.
And we have it in the regulation that the certificate number shall be included on any listing offering short-term rental.
Right.
So what's going to happen is all
So
these
it's
rental
in there.
agencies are going to be sending letters out
Yes.
to all their current renters, telling them that they need to apply for these registrations by a particular time frame if they want to be able to list their properties through
Right.
that rental agency's system.
Yep,
I suspect what will happen is the rental agency will do that.
yeah, they'll probably.
Yeah.
They'll take care of.
Or
the
they'll do
registration. They'll take care of the registration for the property owner.
Oh, okay.
In other words, I rent my property through you, you're gonna handle the registration, get that registration.
All
because
right.
You're the one that does the advertising.
Yeah,
I don't do that. So I think the rental agencies are gonna do.
So they're going to sign and do everything?
So I suspect there'll be, a lot of activity in the fall, because the rental agencies will know they have to get these numbers before they advertise it.
Perfect.
In the winter for next summer. That's why we picked those dates
Okay.
as kind of making the most sense.
And there'll be a learning curve that first year when that
Right.
sort of going from one to the other.
I mean, as you guys know, a lot of the properties that are under short-term rentals are rented through agencies.
Yes.
There aren't that many that are done individually, if you will. So, these rental agencies, they'll know what they need. They already know because they participated in the work group conversations, so they know this is coming,
We should actually consider, as part of our outreach, placing some display ads in, say, the Cape Cod Chronicle, like a quarter-page ad and public announcement. We ought to be getting in everyone's face
Yep.
in some organized, repetitive way to make sure that everybody that's around is aware of this.
Okay. All right, good. We can go to another, item 4, update John McGrath. Did we hear back from the state?
I reached out again this week, emailed the person, my contact there, and I did not hear anything back. I can tell you that the police department has started ticketing and have written a ticket for parking by Mr. McGrath in front of his property. He was blocking part of the roadway and was facing in the wrong direction, as he usually does. And so he has been ticketed at least once.
Okay.
But I did not heard anything back from the state.
Were you able to get the name of the person who's responsible
Yes.
at this point? Yeah. so
Yeah,
you had the contact.
I have her name,
Okay,
I have
so
an email, so,
We'll just
yeah.
have to work on that, so Carol?
Okay. When do you think we're going to say thank you to the DEP and take over the McGrath property like we were going to in the beginning? It seems that we're not tops on the priority list, which is understandable. And I'm just thinking, it's been going on for quite a while. I don't know how many fines they have levied him with?
None.
None. Okay, and would there be
Parking
any
fine.
reception if they do? No. And there's more trash than ever there. And I'm just wondering if, we can say, thank you we appreciate your help, we like, your findings, we appreciate those. And we have the money to go in and clean it up and put a lien on his house. And it just seems that, we need to be doing something, we need to move forward, in my opinion. But,
Well, yeah, I agree. I don't think, we don't have a date, but we're
close.
We're getting close, and if we get no response from the state, now the state's slow, so you can't expect that in 1 month they're gonna do something, but at some
Yeah.
point, we'll have to move ahead.
It's been since DEP first came out to do their property surveying and things like this and came up with their findings. It's been a few months, I think, right? And,
I think he was out there last in the fall.
Yeah,
I think he
we will
wrote his
reach,
letter, he was higher up at the beginning of the year, so.
So now we're
like 2 months.
now we're March, and it's gonna be April,
Bob may
it's
have
gonna
more
be May.
experience. Bob may have more experience working with the state. What should
we
we
will
expect?
reach out to the state.
Yes.
And make one last concerted effort to see if we can get an update from them,
Thank you.
all right? 'Cause
Yeah, I think
it does take time, especially when there's the potential for court action. I can
Right.
tell you that, it definitely takes time to make sure
We
that
have a lot
all
of lawyers.
we just,
ducks are in a row and everything's lined up and documentation, as town council was referencing. Because the state, in these kind of circumstances, the state does have the ability to fine substantially more than we do. And we can fine in the hundreds, they can fine in the thousands and tens of thousands. So it's not something they throw together in, 2 days.
Well, I understand that, but do we have to wait for the state? I mean, it's like,
No, we don't
he's
have
probably going to.
You don't have to.
He's going to ignore those
In my opinion,
fines, I'm sure.
we've chosen to.
Pardon me?
For some We have chosen to for some reasonable period of time, but we haven't given up any of our authority, so.
Right.
And we decide to on choose.
I think we,
No, I would agree with what Bob said.
my vote.
And see, I know some of the higher up people at DEP.
I think our best strategy at this point, given all that we've done so far, is to just be a squeaky wheel and in a respectful way, remind them that
That's what I've been
the Board of Health is very interested in moving forward on this.
And the property owners there, for their homes, and summer people come to visit them, they have to drive by that. And also Barn Hill Road. He's also bringing more and more.
The enforcement order for Barn Hill Road has been sent.
Good.
The enforcement order for Barn Hill Road has been sent.
Okay, could we get a copy of that, maybe,
Yes.
in the next meeting packet or something? Okay. Yeah, I think we stay the course.
Yeah. No, I agree with what Carol said. I mean, and then I always add, phase one, getting all the junk off the roadway itself and the asphalt and
That was
putting up that
fabulous.
guardrail, and now they're ticketing cars. That is a huge step forward in terms of the safety.
Yes, it
So
is.
that's a plus, but the rest of it, okay. Update COVID, Dr. Duckinson?
Well, COVID is still here. I'm sure everybody has heard the recent situation in Yarmouth, where they've had a nursing home that has had 75-plus positive cases among staff as well as residents. And
That's
as of
remarkable.
last Friday, they had 5 deaths just recently, which is more than they had during the first, 2.5 years of COVID. So it's definitely still here. The CDC has raised the community level for Barnstable County back up to median.
Okay.
We were high, this time last year with Omicron, and then we went down and fluctuated between low and medium depending on the week. And the last couple of weeks, we were down at low. Well, it's back up to high again. In Chatham specifically, our numbers, thankfully for a change, are the lowest, some of the lowest on the Cape. Both our 14-day % positivity and average daily incident rate are the 3rd lowest on the Cape, which is good news because weeks before that, we were up towards the other end of the Cape. This part of the Cape was some of the highest numbers. So, things continue to fluctuate. So, the best guidance is be up to date on your vaccines, including the bivalents. If you're, one of those people that's more susceptible, immune compromised, or family members, take precautions, wear masks in indoor places and things like that, because it's not going away anytime soon. And the first combination flu and COVID-19 vaccine is out there and in clinical trials. So in the future, you may not need 2 shots a year. You may just only need 1 and get protection both from seasonal flu as well as COVID-19.
Question. I read an interesting editorial in the New York Times. I think it was maybe 2 weeks ago, written by Brett Stevens, who outlined what he said was a very powerful meta-study analysis of the effectiveness of masks. It was a foreign place that did this and not domestically. And he painted a picture that the CDC has been wrong and that the public policy in our country revolving around the wearing of protective masks has been shown scientifically to have been ineffective, where there was evidence that in locations with strict mask wearing compliance and others that had there was no difference in infection. My question to you, sir, is you must have heard or read or learned about this. Do you have an opinion of whether this is bona fide or whether it's not, or?
I don't have an opinion. I mean, I have a scientific background. I always look at the facts and the data and whatnot. And honestly, there's data and facts on both sides
Okay.
of that argument. So it's a policy decision as to whether or not, what side you agree with.
Okay.
There's good data I've seen on both sides.
Okay, because the CDC's response was they're not necessarily embracing the findings of this international study because they have reason to have continued confidence in the effectiveness of mask wearing. So since I read that one editorial, I've just not seen anything else. So I don't know.
I think there's been on both sides. Did you have a comment, Dick?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of those kind of studies around, but, you know, the data is questionable. And I think if you go back to the very beginning of COVID, where countries where people were more compliant and wore masks had dramatically, fantastically low incidence of COVID. South Korea, Japan, places like that. You know, those people are physiologically the same. You know, there are people from China going to South Korea and Japan. The disease did not spread. And in this country, you know, when a significant portion of the population during the heights of COVID just decided for one reason or another not to wear masks, we ended up having 1 million deaths. You know, we're the most medically sophisticated, advanced country in the world, and we have the highest death rate from COVID. And what do we have? We have half of our population doesn't wear masks, you know, for social, political, whatever reasons. And that's really the only thing that I can think of that would explain why this country has such a dismal showing with COVID. And so, you know, when I go to the Stop and Shop, I wear a mask. You know, I've worn a mask all my life in my work, and there's nothing wrong with it. And, you know, you pay your money and take your choice, but I don't want to get COVID.
I think vaccination too is a thing.
Well, that's been shown to be
Yeah.
highly, 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 highly
I
effective
still know,
to save lives.
my brother still doesn't get it.
But I can testify, 2 people in not my immediate family, my relatives that live in Chatham, had COVID last week. So it is.
The Chatham Men's Club speaker didn't give the talk this week.
Is that right?
Because she got COVID.
Yeah, so it's
you know,
still
and
around.
she works with elderly people every day.
Wow.
It's scary.
You just can't drop your guard.
No, you have to continue to take reasonable precautions depending on you and your families and particular circumstance. I mean, you know, some people are much more susceptible to the flu, some people are much more susceptible to COVID. And, you know, you just have to do what's right for you and for them. And, you know, we're getting to that point now, you know, where people have to start taking the responsibility themselves.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, maybe we can go ahead and
Do the minutes.
take care of these minutes. We've got first the minutes from January 30th. Does anybody have an addition or a question? Minutes of January 30th. If not, can I get a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve the minutes of January 30th.
I'll second.
Second, okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Okay, those minutes are accepted. And then we have minutes of February 13th. Any additions or?
Yeah, on page 7, the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph up from the bottom, $200 is not enough to deter parking violations. I would remove the word parking. The first sentence on that paragraph.
Okay. Any other additions, corrections? All right, can I get a vote? All in favor?
I'll make a motion to approve February 13th minutes.
A second?
Second.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, those minutes of February 13th are approved.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are adjourned, and we're waiting for the on-air light to go off.